5 theories about the meaning of the D in One Piece. If you like these kinds of videos, give the video a like and subscribe. Well, let's start the video with what I believe is the best theory about the meaning of the D, and even to this day I still maintain that this is the true meaning of the D in One Piece. But let's start with the theory. And it's that for years, Oda has been showing us some small clues about what happened in the Void Century and the meaning of the famous D. To understand what meaning I bring for the D, first we'll have to take a small but interesting detour throughout the entire story. We'll start by analyzing the person who very likely knows the most about all these mysteries. And yes, I mean Imu-sama. And the little we have seen of Imu has shown us many details that not only tell us information about what they are like, but also shout out information that is very easy to overlook. 3 scenes we can investigate. The first is when Imu sits on the empty throne before the Gorosei. The second is when they go to see the Straw Hat. And lastly, but by no means less important, we have the moment when they are summoned to see the Gorosei. And yes, today we will focus mainly on the last 2, with which I will be able to give you the meaning of the D. Okay, right now, I know there may be people saying they don't understand what I'm saying and wondering how am I going to glean such things simply from panels where literally you can't see anything. Well, actually, Oda has done very well to hide as much as possible, but the truth is I think we can find something very interesting if we look closely enough. And it's that when Imu goes to the giant straw hat, several questions arise. Where is that place? Why does it have Luffy's poster? Who is the other person? Why do they have a hat identical to Luffy's but larger stored there? And what do you think if we start answering all of them? To begin with, this place is located under the Pangaea Castle, and we see Imu going down some stairs and reaching a part, an area that, as everything indicates, is a sort of cold storage. So what better place than this to build such a facility than by doing it underground? The sign he carries is Luffy's to compare his hat with the one he has stored. I think we all agree on that. And the extra sign, the secondary sign, is of Blackbeard. We can assume this because he is a D like Luffy, and because later when they call Imu, his sign is torn on the ground, right next to Luffy's. This panel disrupted the entire community at the time, and from there, all the theories began, saying that this was Joy Boy's hat, that it was an ancient weapon, that it was the crown of an ancient king, and many other crazy ideas. For me, this posed a big problem because it's supposed that Joy Boy represents the opposition to the world government, and doesn't it seem strange to you that they keep his hat? It is true that he could keep it as a trophy, but I have really thought about it and it doesn't quite fit with the way everything has been presented to us. And the truth is, this seemed very strange and unusual to me, so I started thinking of various possibilities and reached a rather curious conclusion. And that straw hat belonged to Joy Boy. But really, this hat is nothing important, or at least it wasn't before. And if you haven't misunderstood, this hat was nothing more than something Joy Boy wore, among many others. The important thing is to explain why Imu keeps that hat, if it was nothing more than an accessory for many people. Let's see who Joy Boy was during the Void Century. And yes, to clear up any confusion, I clarify that Imu was already alive at that time, and the little we know about Joy Boy was tremendously expanded thanks to Roger's flashback, where we saw the Sea King say that his sovereign would soon be born, and that another sovereign would be born in a distant sea. All of this happened on Fishman Island, along with the poneglyph that Robin read there. These 2 people were known as sovereigns, and now their wills, which reside in Luffy and Shirahoshi, are going to meet again. Now that we know this, we can understand that Imu is wondering if that young man has his will. We know that there was a great ancient kingdom that was completely erased from history, a very advanced place from which I believe both Imu and Joy Boy came. In this place, those who already had the letter D in their name coexisted with those who, didn't they? In other words, there were the country's rulers and their slaves. And we know that in this series, slavery plays a very important role, from the slaves in Mary Joas to those sold in Sabaody. And on this island, there was a ruler, and under him were high-ranking officials, one of whom was Imu himself, who had as a slave and friend a man capable of smiling even in the worst situations. Joy Boy. Okay, let's see. I know this sounds very crazy, but now everything will make sense, really. Pay attention as I'm going to tell you how I arrived at this strange conclusion. In this case, I believe he might have taken inspiration from the biblical story of Joseph. This man was sold to the Egyptians as a youth and lived as a slave to Potiphar, who was a servant of the Pharaoh as captain of his personal guard. Over the years, Joseph earned the respect and trust of Potiphar like no other slave. Because of a lie from Potiphar's wife, Joseph was arrested and imprisoned, thus separating them. As an additional note, I would like to point out the meaning of his name, which is he who belongs to Ra, with Ra being the sun god for the Egyptians. In my opinion, in the Old Kingdom, all the slaves had straw hats on their heads, which allowed them to be differentiated from the rest, as well as carrying the letter D in their name. This D would be nothing more than simply Dore, the word for slave in Japanese. And perhaps one day, problems started between both sides, possibly due to these two men, maybe over wanting the Akuma no Mi or the Haki. In my opinion, Joy Boy was falsely accused of treason and this made him explode. All of this would create even more parallels with the story of Joseph, but we won't go into details as that is not the topic at hand right now. Whatever it was that originated this conflict is what created the enmity between Imu and Joy Boy. And after the war between both sides, Imu felt terrible for having to kill the man who was once his dearest and most trusted friend. That's why he kept his hat and possibly his entire body. And now I want to give you all the reasons that made me think all this. What's important is the hat, as we know the government likes to market slaves, making it so that anyone who sees it knows what it means that they are slaves. That is why I think that before putting on the current Dragon's Claw, they simply put on a hat that everyone wore, as there was no enmity like there is now. This proof I'm going to show you can be quite dangerous, as it relies heavily on the anime and is not fully detailed in the manga, and normally I don't even like reading these kinds of things, as the anime may have changed 1,000 things as has happened many other times. But in this case, I see it as something very different because it is such a subtle and unnecessary detail to include that it might not have been added just for the sake of it, but it must have a very clear purpose. And I'm talking about the moment when Imu is alerted to go see something rosy, and at that moment, the manga shows us someone kneeling to deliver the message. Just like with Imu, we can't see anything more than their figure without any detail in this scene, but in the anime, we see this scene better, and we see that person. And interestingly, they are wearing a straw hat with a red bandana. As I mentioned, it seems almost impossible to believe that this detail, so unimpressive and striking at first glance, was placed by Toei's decision. They can add content to fights, dialogues, and backgrounds without importance, but something as important as the protagonist's hat, which was once worn by the legendary king of the pirates, Goldie Roger, I do not think it was something random. And if we zoom into the manga image, we can intuit that the hat is there, but we cannot be certain because this person appears completely shaded. It seems that Oda did not want to show it in the manga, but I think he passed the information to Toei to place it there subtly, so subtly that to this day, after asking many people about this scene, only one person mentioned that it seemed familiar, but never gave it the slightest importance. This surprised me a lot since I haven't seen anyone talk about this scene on the internet, and if you've seen it out there, please let me know because I would like to know more about the topic. In this way, we see that the slaves of the ancient kingdom carried both the D and the straw hat. Why did someone continue wearing the hat, and why did some families not hide the D? To answer this, we must first answer why you would hide the D. The most logical thought is that the D were annihilated and persecuted by the world government. That's what everyone who hid the D from their names thought. But for me, this goes much further, thanks to this mysterious person who went to talk to Imu. The people with the D were captured and returned to serve their masters from the ancient kingdom. All this happened before or even during the Void Century. After having recaptured so many D, the government calmed down and stopped the hunt. But the world didn't know this, so the former slaves mostly remained hidden in many of the families that concealed their names, like the Trafalgar family, who were able to continue passing down the legacy by secretly naming their children with the D. This way, only they would know and could maintain the legacy for centuries. With the strong waves that were created in the world, many alarms were raised in different places by the world government. They were frightened to see a D displaying their initial without hesitation and stirring things up globally. This caused many families to start showing their full name, as they saw there was a major criminal with the D who was not annihilated and erased from history. All this led to another D making noise worldwide, this being Goldie Roger. The government did not consider censoring Roger's name at first, but upon seeing all that he achieved, they feared the resurgence of the D. And not long after, Dragon began his journeys, liberating towns from the power of the world government and creating the famous Revolutionary Army. Currently, we have Luffy, who not only does not hide his D, but his trademark is the straw hat of those same slaves. And the thing is, think about it, Luffy has no idea about all this, and the world government and the families that have passed down through history from generation to generation are stupefied by each action the rubber boy takes around the world. For this reason, he wanted to compare the hat because he couldn't believe that this was real, that someone was reigniting the flames of the rebel slaves. This is why I believe his bounty increased so much after going for Big Mom. They considered him a real threat, not just for everything he had done before, but because he was a D with the hat, and he was doing it, and they fear he might be seeking revenge without knowing that he just wants to be free and eat meat. All this because a D decided not to hide his name and went out to sea with the hat, using it as a message to the then newly created world government, something like saying, "I do not fear you, we are here and we will regain our freedom someday, just wait." The D that Roger was waiting for was none other than the one capable of fulfilling this mission, carrying the name and the hat. Because besides, when Roger returned from Laugh Tale, we saw that he spoke with Shanks and asked him a question, to which the answer made Shanks cry, because it meant that Shanks could not follow Roger's dreams. I believe that at Laugh Tale, Roger discovered everything that also included a prophecy mentioning a brave D wearing the hat and freeing the entire world. So he told young Shanks, who surely spent his days encouraging his captain, his mentor, and his father figure, saying that he would take charge of freeing the world, that he would be the one to finish the task. So, Shanks went to ask if he discovered anything about the world's past, to which Roger responded with a simple, "Yes, I'm sorry kid, but it seems you won't be able to follow my ideals," or something similar. This is why Shanks fervently sought a D who could wear the hat. He surely imagined that Roger's son would be in the East Blue, as he possibly knew from Rayleigh that he wanted to have one, and imagined that Garp, who was from the East Blue, would have secretly taken care of him, just like Roger did with baby Shanks. Therefore, I believe his mission was to search island by island to find Roger's son to try to give him his father's hat. But this took a big turn as he met Luffy and saw the living image of his captain, even saying the same words. Luckily, because if it had been Ace, he would have said that it was Roger's and would have burned it in 2 seconds. But going back to the topic, I still have a little more to tell you, and it is that I would like to comment on how all the Ds have a strong sense of freedom inherited from the Void Century and the hundreds of prisoners in Mary Geoise. And each has it in their own way, but we see how they all fight for that feeling of freedom that the slaves themselves had. Without going into much detail, and to finish this part, I would like to point out that many of the D concealed their initials and spread throughout the world. An example of this could be the people of Wano, especially the noble families. This would completely explain Momonosuke's attitude, alongside Luffy, Roger, and very possibly Trafalgar Law upon arriving in the land of Zoo. And if we remember when Zunesha starts talking to Momonosuke and Luffy, we see Law hesitating a bit, and then, in fact, he disappears from the scene. All this happens until the conversation ends. Oda very likely did this on purpose to hide his suffering, and in this way make us confused and think it's some kind of form of haki from Zunesha, when simply being a D would be something hereditary. Something like how it is considered that the king's haki can also have a strong hereditary factor. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that the Kozuki share blood with the D clan. Only they could notice that voice, and both Odin and Suiko sensed it much more strongly than the rest, with Luffy feeling that Zunesha would not follow his order. But we see that this is very simple, and this ability would simply be hereditary. And it is because the Kozuki, who have lived in a completely closed country and thus less exposed to mixing their DNA with people outside the clan, especially if they only married among nobles and families, would explain why they have such a strong lineage. And it is because the very nobles of Wano would be descendants of the same slaves. In this way, Oda would once again be hiding something in plain sight and making what we believe have a completely different meaning. Besides, the hairstyle of the Tenryubido is most likely based on the movie The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. I won't go into details about the movie, but I will comment that I think the slaves also have it, as this is a typical hairstyle of the king. This way they would have the hairstyle doubled forward. And something like that is very similar to the typical ancient hairstyles in Japan, which could mean that by having closed off Wano, they did not adopt external cultures. And this bun has almost, well, not changed since then. I think they shared the hairstyle because it was the insignia of the ancient kingdom. If we look closely, it could be said that this hairstyle resembles the tail of a great whale entering the water. I think they had a great love for these animals, mainly island whales, which might place the ancient kingdom in the West Blue, since these whales originate there, also being the sea where Ohara was located. What a coincidence. When the survivors from the first time in the story of the ancient kingdom went to sea, they went with an allied tribe that helped them in the war, the Mink. Once in their country, they shaped a tree in the form of a whale to show that they were allies, and they gave them a road poneglyph and placed the Kozuki emblem. And in fact, the road poneglyph is right at the whale's tail, like the hairstyle. It seems like quite a coincidence to me. I told you I also think I know the name of the ancient kingdom, a kingdom that had the keys to all this, most likely due to the intelligence and work of the slaves. This kingdom had a name that even the Gorosei wanted to prevent from being heard by CP9, who was sent to Ohara. And indeed, if they were going to kill them, it didn't matter if they said it. Only the allies of the world government could leave with that information, and the Gorosei were concerned that Spandam would hear it because its name meant a lot and could cause many problems if known. The name that this kingdom had would shock Spandam and the readers themselves, as it was a name we all knew too well, and that's because the name of that kingdom was none other than Mary Geoise. That's right, that kingdom had the same name as where the celestial dragons now live. But why do they share a name? What does it mean that the ancient kingdom was called that? And why did they adopt the same name? And who created the new Mary Geoise? And all these questions were what the Gorosei feared Spandam would ask. And now I am going to answer all these questions. It was a very beloved country for the slave owners. When it was corrupted by the D's, they decided to completely destroy this country and created a new nation, a new pure and immaculate nation at the highest point of the earth, along with all the noble families of the world that supported them, except for the Nefertari family, which decided to stay in Arabasta. For this reason, I believe that the Kozuki are descendants of the D's. Runaways from the kingdom that existed, specifically being a family related to birds. And we have seen how some have uncommon names, like monkey, jaguar, Trafalgar, rocks, etc. This completely sounds to me like each family either specialized in what their name says, or served families with that name, as if we say that Luffy's ancestors were the monkeys, thus making Luffy the slave D of the monkeys. The birds, as I mentioned before, would be the ancestors of the Kozuki, and this is because their emblem is a bird. If it were me, I would want to keep the name in some way to the old name I had to discard, and what better way than to use it as an emblem for future generations. I also came across other possible D's, and again it sounds crazy, and some would be the Jetty Cool brothers. Yes, do you remember those two who appeared out of nowhere? Well, these guys wore a hat very similar to that of our protagonist, and interestingly, it was larger in size and found in an icy area. And now is when we return to the topic I mentioned at the beginning and what could be considered giant quotes. And it's true that the hat that Imu keeps is indeed large, but the anime exaggerated its size a lot, and because of that, we might have an incorrect idea of their bodies. And if we reduce their size a bit to match the mangas, we have a size much closer to the hat that is kept and could belong to Joy Boy. Could it be that Joy Boy was from this strange race of giants? Well, I think so. And I will explain my reasons, and it is that the Yeti Cool brothers appeared for the first time in the last panel of chapter 665, but they did not become prominent until 666, titled with their name, Yeti Cool Brothers. Curious that the first time we see a race that could be that of Joy Boy, the natural enemy of the gods, they are introduced in chapter 666. Which would be the number of the beast, the number of the demon. On top of that, it turns out that this hat is kept in a freezer, and although it could be used for more things, the hat could see them drawn without suffering the effects of the cold. For this reason, I think Oda decided to do it this way, as a nod so that later on we can say he dropped a hint so long ago, and wonder how we hadn't seen it before. And it's not just that these two brothers wore those hats, but they were called Yetis, which are known for resembling apes a lot. You might wonder if it has any importance that they resemble apes, and I'll tell you that, just like with the name of the ancient kingdom, we've seen it before. And when we went up to Scipioea and saw Roger arrive, we saw a large bell tower that had some monkeys engraved with the hat. At first I thought it was a prophecy about Monkey D. Luffy, but after talking with a friend, she told me it seemed like a myth to her. This way, I came to the conclusion that yes, they were literal drawings, but not about a monkey king, rather about a very important man who fought in the Great War against the world government, the giant ape Joy Boy. Therefore, as a final conclusion, the D lived in the ancient kingdom and were the slaves, bearing both the letter in their name and the straw hats as their mark of slavery. And after a conflict with their masters, they were captured and enslaved again in Maryjoyce. Some escaped and decided to hide everything from the past, and many of them could have ended up in Guano. The meaning of the D would be Dore, which is slave in Japanese. And one of those who escaped never hid anything, and his hat has traveled for 800 years or more. They continued creating more within their family up to today, which is worn by Monkey D. Luffy, and the ancient kingdom shares a name with the New Maryjoyce, which was created by the winners of the war to keep what their slaves took from them, and I believe that Joy Boy was from the race of the Jetty Cool brothers. So this would be my theory about the D, and I know that more than one of you are now completely freaking out, saying how is this possible? What an incredible theory. I know there will be people thinking that you already know the meaning of the D, and I feel the same way. I love the fact that the D is Dore, that they are slaves. It all fits for me. It makes perfect sense, and as I say, that scene where someone with a straw hat comes to call Imu and treats him as if he were his slave, it fits perfectly. So that would be the first theory, and let's move on to the second. The D, who was this clan or family? Why are the government and especially Imu so obsessed with them? What is the word behind this letter? With all of this, it is clear that Aichi Oda, from the very beginning of the work, and even Oda's first editor, revealed the initial ideas of the work, the sketches and concepts where we can see that the first drawing of who would become Luffy had a headscarf with the Gomu Gomu pattern. And most importantly, that character was named Monkey D. Pow. This lets us understand that from the earliest moments of One Piece, the D, its presence, and the mystery were already in Oda's plans, long before the name Luffy even existed, although we will leave this for another time, because these were not the only things this editor revealed. All this information reinforces that the mystery of the D is not something improvised, but a fundamental piece of the lore. Oda has been preparing its revelation for decades. But what if I told you I think I have discovered the meaning behind the D? and I have done it using hidden clues, folklore, ancient religions, and symbology, and I have reached a point you have probably never heard before. The D does not mean dreamer, nor crescent, nor anything. The D means... wait, I can't tell you yet. First, we need two things. One, that I explain why you've probably never heard this meaning and it makes sense. And two, that you subscribe to the channel. So now let's start from the beginning. First, we'll talk about the Noah's Ark Joy Boy. We go back to Fishman Island. There they show us a sacred, gigantic vessel from the Void Century, the Noah Ark. Does that name ring a bell? It is exactly like Noah's Ark. Plus, it's called Ark, and visually, it also greatly resembles how Noah's Ark is depicted in Western iconography and drawings. And according to King Neptune, in chapter 649, the Noah Ark was built 900 years ago to fulfill a promise from Joy Boy. It was designed to transport the people of Gyojin Island to the surface, and Joy Boy was unable to fulfill his promise, leaving an apology letter on a poneglyph. Does that ring a bell? In the Bible, Noah builds an ark by God's order to save humanity and animals from a universal flood. Joy Boy built an ark, or helped to do so, to save his people. But from what? The next thing we'll talk about is the attack by Imu, and we jump to Lulusia. Imu launches a devastating attack on the kingdom of Lulusia, and the sky darkens. Lightning strikes. The entire island disappears from the map. All this points to it being Uranus, one of the three ancient weapons. In the same way, Dragon and the Revolutionary Army theorized it, and that this would be activated with a replica of the Mother Flame that Vegapunk was developing, and that was only a partial replica. Vegapunk claims that not even that complete replica could compare to the original, and even so, its power is enough to cause two effects. One, the total and instant destruction of the island, and two, the rise of the sea level by 1 to 2 meters worldwide. This connects us with Vegapunk's posthumous message, and this is where he gave us the major information that 900 years ago there was a great flood caused by the use of ancient weapons during the Great War that occurred in the Void Century, which caused the sea level to rise by up to 200 meters, devastating and leaving approximately 80% of the land surface completely flooded. A catastrophe without preamble. Let's move on to the next. Technology and longevity and the meaning of life. And how is it possible that a society almost a century ago had a scientific and military level so high and immensely superior to the current one? So much so that Vegapunk confirmed this, and in fact, claims that not even he, who is the greatest genius in the world of One Piece, can replicate it. All these points remind me of a specific book, the Bible. And here we come to the big revelation. The D stands for diluvian. This is a word that exists in both English and Spanish and refers to something related to the Great Flood. It can be before or after it, but it always surrounds it. And this is very important. Why? Pay attention. The flood in the Bible was caused by God. The self-proclaimed gods are the ones trying to hide this information and who seem to have a power that would result in the rising sea levels, as happened with Lulusia. So, the flood was not a normal rain of water, but rather a large-scale attack, where countless lightning bolts poured down precisely, caused by the weapon Imu had in their hands, which would be Uranus, using the energy of the Mother Flame, thus generating an artificial flood with practically the same consequences as the one in the Bible. Additionally, in Genesis 5:32, it is said that Adam lived 930 years. Humans before the biblical flood were described as long-lived, wise, and capable of great works. In One Piece, the only character confirmed as a survivor from the Void Century is Imu, with over 800 years. Also Zunesha, who is condemned to wander the world since before that era. Curious, and if the humans of the Void Century were like those from Genesis, more intelligent, more long-lived, more advanced, and that's why they were destroyed. And wait, are there more correlations with the Bible, since humans, being more intelligent and long-lived, reached a higher technological development that led them to wars and also to evil? And we just have to remember the Tower of Babel, which was said to reach the sky in height. That is why God wanted to restart the earth, as mentioned in Genesis. And the Lord saw that the wickedness of humanity was great on the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil. And the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the man I have created, from man to livestock, reptiles, and the birds of the sky, for I am grieved to have created them. In the case of One Piece, we do not have a figure of a creator god, but there is the self-proclamation of being one, as is the case with the Tenryubito. It's not the first time they've made such a claim, and well, as they say in the World 2 of the mural, they killed the sun and called themselves gods. This implies a confrontation between what is said to be right or should be followed as a norm or law, and also the freedom for which Joy Boy fought, applying this divine punishment against the revolution of all these races, concluding with the attempt to end those who opposed them. This global catastrophe ended up being caused. And why would this make sense? Because in the Bible, 1, the flood was sent by God to purge evil, and 2, humans had strayed and taken the wrong path according to God's law, corrupting the world. 3. God decided to destroy everything and start anew. And in One Piece, the Tenryubito call themselves gods. Imu seems to have the power to restart the world. And 3. Joy Boy and the Ancient Kingdom were a threat to their order. Or with an artificial flood with impossible technology, the Mother Flame. The Mother Flame plus Uranus. And watch out, because there's more. Let's talk about Emeth. Remember the giant iron robot, the one that activated upon hearing the drums of liberation and was created in the Void Century and attacked Mary Joyce in the past? It's called Emeth. Emeth is a Hebrew word that means truth. In the Jewish legend of the Golem of Prague, the word Emeth was written on the golem's forehead to give it life. If the first letter was erased, it became Met, death. Oda does not choose names randomly. That robot has been waiting centuries to awaken, just like the truth of the world. Emeth represents the dormant truth that Joy Boy left behind and the mission entrusted to him. Now let's go to the giants, the Nephilim, and the Bible. Because, in addition, there's something that has always seemed curious to us, and that is that there are D who are also giants. Something that can be surprising because it would break that possible family or clan relationship by being different races. But let's go back to the Bible before the flood. If we read Genesis 6:4, it says the following: there were giants on the earth in those days. It correlates again with biblical texts. Before the flood, it would explain why there are people from the D family as giants, like Jaguar and Saul. Furthermore, in Elbaf, we have already seen marriage and having a child between a human and a giant. Gaban Giga Chad, they took the sons of God, the daughters of men, and they bore them children. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. There are many interpretations, but one of the most interesting for the story is the mix between fallen angels or deities with humans, explaining ancient myths and legends. And we have a hybrid race about which we know nothing, but which has always been hunted and enslaved by the world government to the point of near extinction. And yes, I am talking about the Buccaneers. The community has typically thought that the Buccaneers are a mix between giants and humans, but recently we've seen a child from both races that does not generate a new one, as in the case of Skopper Gaban and Red. Now then, is there another race with great resilience, greater power, strength, and dark skin? Yes, those formerly considered and called gods who lived on the Red Line, the Lunarians. And if the Buccaneers are a mix between humans and the ancient gods of that time, it would maintain the thread explained so far, explain the race of the Buccaneers, and align again with the Bible, explaining the reason for the hatred and persecution by the world government, just as they did with the Lunarians. Everything fits. Conclusion: we have an advanced civilization destroyed by a flood caused by the self-proclaimed gods. Then we have an ark that sought to save an oppressed race. Then we have giants or similar races that could have been purged. Then we have a universal flood, also a Hebrew word written by a robot 900 years ago that only awakens with the truth and also direct correlations with the Bible and the events of One Piece. And everything points to the fact that the bearers of D are not simply rebels or pirates with luck and power. They are the heirs of the world before the flood. That's why they hate them. That's why they are the natural enemy of the gods. That's why it has been said several times in the work that the D always brings the storm. And if Joy Boy was the Noah of his time, then Luffy is the flood of this era. And this would be the second theory indicating that the D means diluvian. I really like the whole theme of the relationship with the Bible because it's clear there could be a strong connection. Obviously, we know that Oda is a very intelligent person who loves to have everything connected, and it could be diluvian. And it seems like a very original and very interesting theory to me, so that's why we bring it. Let's move on to the third one. And with the third theory, we are going to go with one of the most famous, most well-known by the entire One Piece community, and at the same time, one of the simplest, since we are not going to focus on parallels with other works. We are not going to focus on parallels with other stories, and we are not going to dig through the manga for specific dialogues or things, but we are going to go to a more general level. But on the other hand, this theory is well supported, fits well with the work, and is probably something you've all heard or thought of. And if not, let me know in the comments because I'd be surprised. The theory is simply and plainly that the letter D means a smile. That is, when we take the D and turn it around, we see a smile. So basically, that is what the D would mean. I know there will be people who don't agree at all and think that this doesn't make sense, but it's true that throughout the work of One Piece, we've seen certain arguments and certain things that could make us think that this might be real. And in fact, I would tell you that this theory, despite being many years old, as the manga has progressed specifically since the Wano arc, I think this theory can become much more strengthened. The idea, as I said, is that the D means a smile. Now then, why would this happen? Why would the D be that? A smile. There are several arguments to think this, and one of them is the strange relationship between the D and smiles. And it's that when we've seen some D characters die, they've had a smile. And we've seen, for example, Luffy, when he was about to die in Logtown, he smiled and the lightning struck and saved him. Then we have Ace, who smiled before he died as well. Even Roger, too, the last thing he did was smile. And as I say, this strange relationship might suggest that the D could mean a smile. Besides this, there are many things. Obviously, a very important factor is that the final island is called Laugh Tale, which is Tale of Laughs. So obviously, this idea implies that maybe this D means smile because it is completely related to Laugh Tale, with laughter. And another argument to consider is that in One Piece there are very distinctive laughs, and it is one of the most important and distinctive elements of all of One Piece. We start watching the series, and surely if we think a bit, 3 or 4 very distinctive laughs come to mind, which are very strange and given a lot of detail. It's true that not all the people who have these distinctive laughs are D, but it is also true that this idea that laughs are important has been emphasized a lot. So of course, beyond the D meaning smile, it could come from it being a reminder that laughter is important for something, or at least it was for the ancient kingdom, and this might have importance in the future. But as I say, those are variations of the same branch of the theory, which is that it comes from the D, which would be the smile. Something else important that we can highlight, and that can be added as a very interesting argument, is that in the Wano arc, right at the end, when Luffy awakens his devil fruit, we see that he transforms into Gear 5, and we see something very important, which is that Luffy starts to laugh a lot more. And it seems, as I said, that the sun god Nika was also known as the god of liberation and many other nicknames, but among them, it seems he always brings laughter, always brings happiness. In fact, Luffy's personality changes a lot when he is in Gear 5 compared to his normal state. There is a big difference. Even we have seen that characters from the Elba arc mentioned by Kuma himself have said that this, well, brought happiness, that the sun god Nika brought laughter and happiness wherever he went. Then, once again, we see the importance of laughter, and of course knowing how he is writing things, knowing how this gentleman likes to have everything calculated, we have seen that definitely, based on all the things I have mentioned in this video, and many other details that can be gleaned, because if we start looking, we can find things everywhere. Is that precisely laughter is important, the smile is very important. And what better way to hide it in plain sight? The fact of, as I say, including all these references would be nothing more than for when we reach the final arc and things about the Void Century are explained to us, it can be revealed that laughs are important. And this would also be justified by saying that those of the D clan would have the D in their name because it would be a smile. Being this, as I say, well, it depends on the variation, like a reminder that the smile is important to activate something, like a reminder that laughter is important for the Void Century, like perhaps laughter is important because they were the ones in charge of bringing laughter to the world seen in another way. So, there are many variations, but the same thing always happens, and this would make a bit of sense. Because if we start thinking about why all the D we have seen have a D, and there is no one with a full name, I mean, maybe the Monkey D family has the D because they don't know what it means, because it has been lost over the years. Even in the Gold D family, or even in the Jaguar D family. But really, in all the D we've seen, no one has their full last name, and they all have a D. Perhaps that D we think is a word is nothing more than that, a smile, a symbol that means a smile. I think this makes a lot of sense because, as I said, these are families spread across the world, even belonging to different races, because we have seen that, for example, Saul is a giant and has nothing to do with Luffy in terms of race, and we have seen that they indeed share the same D and everything remains the same. So, these are quite curious things, and perhaps we are thinking week after week, trying to analyze everything, searching for hundreds of meanings and all, and then in the end, it turns out that it is simply a smile. It's something that personally seems very typical of Eiichiro Oda, something that wouldn't surprise me at all if Oda ends up doing this, and I have to say that I can even see it being somewhat feasible. In fact, something very important that is mentioned, that seems to be very important and is said to have been completely intentional and nothing more than symbolism by Oda, let's say, in some way to do a bit of foreshadowing of what will happen with the D and the smile symbol, it's precisely the smile fruits. And it's because the smile fruits we have seen doom those who consume them to laugh forever. That is to say, they cannot express any emotion other than laughter, not only emphasizing laughter again, but it would be a kind of macabre parody of the true power of the D or Nika, which would be to make people laugh with joy. And this would be a bit different, since we would see that people smile with the D's. People are happy, and the D symbolizes the smile, and those fruits that remain somewhat defective and are closely linked to the bad side of the world, with what could be the world government, since the person who trafficked them was Doflamingo, who is the closest representation to Imu that we have seen in the One Piece manga. Is the person who was controlling them, which would be nothing more than a kind of parody, showing us that it would be like a fake laugh. That is to say, the D would bring you true happiness and joy, would make you laugh, while the smile would make you laugh, but would not truly make you happy. In other words, it would simply be an aesthetic thing that you would see from the outside, like everyone appearing very happy, but inside they would be shattered. Being, as I say, a kind of parody on the part of Eiichiro Oda, making it very macabre. So, as I say, this theory is one of the oldest in the One Piece community. It is one of the first meanings given to the D in One Piece, and it seems that arc after arc, at least, the smiles and laughter are gaining strength. Now I ask you, do you think this theory could possibly be real? Personally, I see a bit of a problem. It is true that I can see a lot of symbolism, but it is also true that there are other theories that convince me quite a bit, and I quite like the idea that the D could mean a smile. I would have to see how Oda can do it, and I think that if it's really incorporated into the work, it could be quite interesting, but it's one thing for me to like how it could be embedded in the work, another thing is for me to like the result, and another is to really see the possibility of it happening, which obviously lowers the likelihood significantly. So I want you to leave in the comments right now what you think about this third theory, whether you agree or not, and if you even have any additional arguments to add, then leave them in the comments. And now, let's move on to the fourth theory. As for the fourth theory, we are going to something relatively similar to what we just discussed in the third. Regarding the third theory, beyond having mentioned that the D could mean a smile, the most important, the most notable in comparison to most theories is that, as I have mentioned to you, it does not mean a word. It does not mean, for example, Torre, which we mentioned earlier. It does not mean Diluvian, which we mentioned earlier, but it would mean that, a symbol. And one argument I have given you, which I believe makes a lot of sense, is the fact that no family of the D clan has its full name, given that, as I say I repeat, each one is separated by parts of the world, many don't even know each other and even belong to different races, which, well, wouldn't make much sense for them to have that D, but they would have to have at least one with the full last name, especially because, as I say, they come from family branches from way back. So, what if this really is what I'm saying? Because it's not a word, it's a symbol. Now, what about this? Okay, it's a symbol. What happens? It's not a smile like the third theory, so what does it mean? Well, the idea would be that it doesn't mean anything specific, and this can be a double-edged sword. What I'm getting at is that the theory is literally like this. The theory says that indeed the D doesn't mean anything, but it is very important that it's simply a symbol. The most widespread idea, the most comprehensive idea, is to say that the D is nothing more than an important symbol for either the ancient kingdom or a group of people very affiliated with Joy Boy, or it could even be that it was affiliated with Joy Boy. Within this idea that it does not mean a word, but rather a symbol, I have found some interesting ideas. I have found the idea that the D is nothing more than a representation of what could be seen in the sky as a crescent moon. And in fact, if we look at the text of Elbaf, we see that a crescent moon is also mentioned there. This, as I say, I add myself, since the crescent moon is earlier, but as we see, there is again a representation, so this becomes important again. Another thing that I have thought this D crescent could mean, another thing I thought this letter D could mean, if it were a symbol instead of a letter, it could mean, if we go completely crazy, the top of the straw hat, which obviously again is a letter D. I know it's crazy and doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to argue the theory itself, which, as I said, has several branches, and another idea which has convinced me more and seems to have quite some logic, especially because I think Oda put this in many chapters ago and maybe didn't do it for no reason, and now it seems that he might be incorporating it again, and it's that the D would be a symbol of Joy Boy's Nakama. This might not be clear why I'm going this direction and why they would use a D. Well, I'll explain it very simply. We have to go back to the Alabasta arc, and if we recall, during this arc, we have a problem, which is that Bon Clay touched all the Straw Hats, making them have his faces, and this way, the Straw Hats were afraid to go to Alabasta, meet someone from their crew, and not know if it was that person, or Bon Clay. So what did they decide to do? They put a mark on their arm to differentiate themselves from one another. And this might happen just like that, but when they are saying goodbye to Arabasta, when they are leaving the island, and when the arc is ending, to say goodbye to Vivi, since they cannot say goodbye and look at each other, because obviously Vivi would have problems, they raise their arm with their back turned, showing that X marked on the arm. And in this way, they show Vivi that they are nakamas, and it is a symbol of camaraderie, which Vivi also replicates by raising her arm along with Garu, and in this way, she shows the X and becomes that X into a symbol of their camaraderie. And this, which might seem silly and was mostly forgotten, we've seen that Oda has brought it back. At the beginning of the Elbaf arc, we see that they are reading a newspaper featuring Luffy, and we see that he has an X on his arm. Many people didn't understand this very well, because many thought that this X appeared on Luffy's arm because it was something that showed up in 5th gear, and that it was something not shown to us until now, but in that particular photo, it was visible, and this obviously could be interesting. But the thing is, it is not like that. Let's remember that Vivi is currently with Morgans, who is the person to publish the newspaper with all the photos. So, Vivi, to discreetly let the Straw Hats know she was with Morgans and that she was okay, and they could even go to rescue her, decided to subtly draw that X on her arm as a sort of message to the Straw Hats. What happened? The Straw Hats looking at this newspaper at that moment were not the ones who had been in Alabasta, as the rest had been taken to Elbaf. So Oda has left this a bit on hold for now, but this obviously has to progress later on. And what this theory points out is that Oda has brought this back and is going to give it importance, not just because of Vivi, not just because of all this, but because Oda has always had in mind that what happened to the Straw Hats with Vivi also happened to Joy Boy with the rest of his crew, and perhaps, well, another person, maybe Nefertari Lily, I'm not sure, but instead of putting an X on their arm, they put a letter D. Why? Well, Oda can justify this in 1,000 ways, but the important thing wouldn't be the why, the important thing would be the symbol. And that D would be a way to remember all the people who were involved with Joy Boy in the past, a way to remember all that, a way to show that they were crewmates of Joy Boy without saying it publicly, which is exactly the same thing that happens with the Straw Hats when they are leaving Alabasta, where they couldn't say they were crewmates of Vivi, but look at how they did it to let her see that they were crewmates and left that X on their arm, making it a bit symbolic. So, since Joy Boy was surely the most dangerous person in the world for the world government in the past and caused many problems, many people could not publicly say they were nakamas of Joy Boy, but in a subtly way they hid it in their name by adding a D. In this way, they would recognize each other through the ages, know everything perfectly. It would be a way to honor Joy Boy, who I suppose at that moment might have died or been captured or something, and this would make the world government later find out and understand what the D meant, that it was not anything concrete, but a symbol that those people, many years ago, those families had helped Joy Boy, which I personally like. I find it quite entertaining, quite interesting, and I'm completely on board with it. So personally, I love the idea that the D could mean something that is a symbol. Obviously, if we start to go crazy and begin to put anything into this symbol, we could imagine anything and think it could literally be anything. So surely now that you've heard this theory, that it might mean something specific, a specific symbol, something you'd say, hey, for me, it means this. Now that you've mentioned it, it came to mind, and I think it could be an interesting symbol. Leave it for me in the comments, because you know I love reading them. In fact, you can even debate a little among yourselves in the comments. And I have to say that I like this idea that the D means nothing and is just a symbol. It's very Oda, it's very One Piece, and I think it would be a way to make us ponder a bit, since all the words with D have been related to the D at some point, even by adding or removing arguments. So personally, I quite like it. But now, let's move on to the fifth theory of the D. And now let's move on to the fifth theory, which comes from, as I said, quite a while ago. It's one of the first theories made about the D, one of the most general and one of the most well-known, but perhaps in the latest chapters of the manga, it has gained quite a lot of strength, and the theory is simply that the letter D could mean the word demon. From right now, I know there will be two types of people. Those who might think this theory makes a lot of sense because of, as I said, the recent manga chapters, and those who might think the exact opposite for the same reason, as we have seen that Imu has taken control of certain giants from Elba and has shown to be a demon or has a demon fruit or whatever, but that the world government and Imu have a direct relationship with demons. Obviously, it makes sense that there are people who think one way and people who think another way. Why? Well, basically because with demons existing in a confirmed way in One Piece, it makes sense that the D could be demon, because it opens up the possibility that it exists, which is not a possibility you just made up or something like that. But then we have the negative side, which is that it is precisely the world government that is acting as the demon, meaning the enemies of the D. So this wouldn't make much sense, but let's closely examine why the D could mean demon. The first thing is that despite us having seen Imu being a demon as such, they have been called gods throughout the entire work, and we have seen that indeed the D were the natural enemies of the gods. And throughout all history, the enemies of the gods are the demons. So this theory suggests that it makes a lot of sense for the D to mean demons, as it is a very simple way to say they are demons and that they have enmity with the gods, who would at that moment be the world government. And of course, after the recent chapters, a bit of doubt arises. Are they really gods? Do they call themselves gods? Or are they going to play this card of wanting to make it seem like they're gods and that the others are actually the demons? Or perhaps this makes sense and they were considered demons in the past, and that's why they were given the D when the real demon was someone else. I don't know, but since we have seen demons in this work, this theory gains strength. Then, another strong argument is a very characteristic thing of One Piece. And as I said, there are several anime with their characteristic things, and One Piece has something very specific: devil fruits. Indeed, devil. So, since it is often related that the devil fruits might come from the ancient kingdom, and that the D might also come from there, they were the creators of the devil fruits, or at least their families a long time ago. That is why they were classified as demons, and those fruits as devil fruits, so that everything makes sense, which would be something more representative, and that would make sense within the world of One Piece. Because, as I say, Oda has already used the word, so seeing that and seeing the last chapters, we already have a couple of references to the word demons that we have to keep in mind, because Oda doesn't do it just because, and on top of that, he hasn't included it in characters who are somewhat important. We're talking about how he has included it in the most important power system in One Piece, which are the devil fruits, even above Haki, and he has also included it in the most important character related to the Ds, which is Imu. That is to say, there is a key importance. Then, something important mentioned by the theory is that it is said in the One Piece manga that the D will be the ones to cause another storm. The D are the ones who will bring the storm, and in literature in general, storms often herald the arrival of demonic or cataclysmic beings who are, well, sent by the demons themselves. So storms and demons often have a certain relation, and as I said, the manga specifies that it's the D, therefore, well, the demons would bring the storm. And then, as a final argument, it is mentioned that this D could be a kind of psychological bias to manipulate people. It is said that they were given the name of demons in this way to scare people. That is, in the past, these people were labeled as demons to the enemies of the world government so that people would be afraid of them. If already when we have seen any user of a devil fruit, or when mentioned, it has not pleased them and they have been scared and above all have had certain fear in the majority of the population in the world of One Piece, as can be the East Blue, the North Blue, the South Blue, and the West, it would make sense that if these people are nicknamed demons, as could happen with Nico Robin, who was called the Demon Child, then it would make sense that over time these families have been called demons and that the people would have been quite afraid of them. Even they had to shorten the word to the letter D so that no one would recognize it, but among themselves, they knew that D stood for demon. This way, people wouldn't get scared, and they would keep the D in their name to remember what happened, to remember that they were labeled as demons by the world government. And that in the future, they could seek revenge, which I must say makes quite a lot of sense. And these would primarily be the arguments to think that the letter D can mean demon, demonio, or however you want to see it. As I say, it seems quite well supported, just like the other theories, so I think it deserves a positive point. But the most curious thing about this is that despite having seen 5 very interesting theories about the D, and that many of them are even very popular, it's also true that there are at least 30, 40, or 50 more that also have many arguments to be real, which makes me think many times. If Oda already has a predetermined meaning for this letter, or if he really has, let's say, a range of possibilities, and will choose the one that seems most interesting to him at that moment and also the least discussed, since when we start relating these letters with One Piece, they all end up making more or less sense. As I said, it makes me wonder if these clues are inserted casually, or if Oda is really playing many sides to surprise us no matter what happens. After all, out of these 50 theories that will exist, only one will actually be true. And who knows, it might even be a possibility we haven't considered. But these have been the 5 theories I bring you today about the letter D. If you like the video, I can bring a second part as there are many more, and I can bring theories that are also very interesting. In fact, if you have any theories about the D, you can leave them in the comments and even discuss them with others in the same comment section. And so, for the next video, we can talk about it if it's an interesting idea with solid arguments. You know that if you like the video, you can give it a big like, subscribe to the channel to see more videos.